The air in the sterile white room was so cold it felt like a solid thing, pressing against Naomi's skin through the thin silk of her purple gown. 3 men stood before her, their postures radiating a lazy violence that was far more terrifying than any overt threat. The largest one, a man with a thick neck and a spiderweb tattoo crawling from his collar, took a step forward. His smile was a gash in his face, promising nothing good. Across the room, Minjun was a study in stillness, his dark suit a slash of shadow against the stark walls. His gaze was fixed on her, an unreadable, analytical weight. He hadn't moved. He hadn't spoken. He was waiting to see what she would do. This was a test, another one in a long series of them since she'd been thrust into his world. The man with the tattoo spoke, his voice a low rumble. "Heard you were the smart one. Let's see how smart you are when you can't breathe," he reached for her. Naomi didn't flinch. Her heart was a cold, steady drum against her ribs. She had analyzed the angles, the exits, the weight distribution of each man. She knew the precise location of the steel letter opener on the desk behind her. She had calculated the odds. They were poor, but they weren't zero. This moment, this razor's edge between a disastrous end and an impossible victory, is probably not what you were expecting. If you want to see how a girl, who is supposed to be a sacrificial pawn, ends up running the whole damn game, you know what to do. Like, subscribe and hit that notification bell because you're not going to want to miss a single second of how this all started. Trust me, the beginning is even more insane than this. It all began, as most tragedies do, with a dinner party. The air in her father's house was always thick with the cloying scent of Sun-hee's expensive perfume and unspoken resentments. Naomi moved through it like a ghost, a silent manager of the chaos her family called a life. At 18, she was the one who balanced the household accounts, who negotiated with vendors, who ensured the fragile illusion of their wealth didn't shatter. She was the hyper-competent, invisible engine running a machine designed to celebrate its most useless part, her stepsister, Hannah. Tonight, the performance was for a special audience. Minjun, the fiancé, a man whose name was spoken in whispers in circles her family desperately wanted to enter. He was rumored to be the heir to the Golden Dragon Syndicate, a man whose business dealings were as sharp and clean as the cut of his suits. He was Hannah's prize, the key to securing the family's precarious position. Naomi, dressed in a simple, dark dress that helped her fade into the wallpaper, oversaw the final preparations. Sun-hee, a viper in couture, glided over to inspect the table settings. "Is everything perfect, Naomi? The choice are not people we can afford to disappoint." Her voice was sweet as poison. "Everything is to your specification," Naomi replied, her tone flat, revealing nothing. Her father, Robert, hovered nearby, his face a mask of anxiety. He caught her eye, a flicker of guilt in his gaze before it skittered away. He was a man hollowed out by his own weakness, a spectator in his own home. Then Hannah descended the staircase. She was a blaze of scarlet, a stark, dramatic contrast to Naomi's quiet presence. She preened, soaking in the attention. "How do I look?" she asked, though it wasn't a question. It was a demand for adoration. The dinner was a masterclass in tension. Minjun arrived flanked by 2 men who stood like stone sentinels by the door. He was younger than the rumors suggested, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He moved with a liquid grace that belied the power coiled beneath the surface. He was a predator, and Naomi's family were clumsy herbivores trying to play in his jungle. Hannah, seated beside him, was a caricature of a charming fiancé. She laughed too loudly, touched his arm too often, her performance as garish as her glittering red dress. Minjun remained impassive, his courtesy a thin, cold veneer. His gaze swept the room, cataloging, assessing. It landed on Naomi for a brief, unnerving moment as she directed a server, and she felt a chill, the distinct sensation of being seen and evaluated by something far more dangerous than she had ever encountered. The disaster struck during dessert. A phone, which was supposed to be off, buzzed on the table. It was Hannah's. She glanced at it, and a strange, triumphant smirk crossed her face. Sun-hee shot her a warning look, but it was too late. "I'm so sorry," Hannah announced, standing abruptly, her voice ringing with false regret. "I can't do this. My heart belongs to another." It was a line straight from a bad soap opera. A stunned silence fell over the table. Robert went pale. Sun-hee's face hardened into a mask of fury. Hannah looked directly at Min-jun. "I will not be sold like property." She then turned and fled the room, the dramatic exit she had clearly rehearsed. The silence she left behind was heavy, suffocating. Min-jun placed his fork down with quiet precision. The sound was like a gunshot. His eyes, cold and dark, shifted from Hannah's empty chair to Sun-hee, then to Robert. There was no anger in his expression. There was something far worse. The calm calculation of a businessman reviewing a defaulted contract. The explosion happened after Min-jun and his men left, their departure as quiet and ominous as their arrival. Sun-hee's carefully constructed composure shattered. "That foolish, selfish girl," she shrieked, her voice stripping the elegance from the room. "She has ruined us. Do you have any idea what you've allowed to happen?" She spat at Robert, who flinched as if struck. He stammered, offering weak platitudes that only fueled her rage. Naomi stood by the doorway, observing the meltdown. She was already running the numbers, assessing the damage. The Cho alliance wasn't just for social climbing. She knew that from the coded entries in the family's private ledgers. It was a lifeline. Her father and stepmother had leveraged everything, borrowing from sources that did not practice forgiveness. The marriage to Min-jun was the collateral. Hannah hadn't just broken an engagement. She had signed their death warrant. It was then that Sun-hee's frantic, desperate eyes landed on Naomi. A new, terrible idea began to form on her face. "You," Sun-hee said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You will fix this." Naomi's blood ran cold. She knew what was coming. "Hannah is emotional, flighty," Sun-hee continued, the plan solidifying as she spoke. "But the contract was for a daughter. You are a daughter." Robert looked horrified, but he said nothing. His silence was his consent. "They need a bride," Sun-hee said, advancing on Naomi. "You are of age. You are presentable. You will take Hannah's place." "No," Naomi said. The word was quiet but firm. It was the first time she had ever directly refused her stepmother. Sun-hee's face twisted. "You think you have a choice? We are all ruined if this deal falls through. Your father, me, even you. Do you think his organization will simply write off our debt? They will strip us of everything. You will do this." She grabbed Naomi's arm, her nails digging in. "You will save this family." The next 24 hours were a blur of calculated coercion. Naomi was confined to her room, her phone and laptop confiscated. It wasn't a physical prison, but a psychological one. Sun-hee worked on her with threats, painting vivid pictures of destitution and violence at the hands of Min-jun's associates. Robert tried a different tactic, appealing to a sense of family duty that Naomi had never truly felt. "Please, Naomi," he pleaded through the door. "Just this one thing. I know I haven't been the best father, but this will make everything right. We can be a real family." It was pathetic. It was transparent. It was also, in a strange way, her only exit. Her life in that house was a gilded cage, her intelligence exploited to maintain a facade she despised. Marrying a man like Min-jun was a leap from one cage to another, but the new cage was an unknown. It held different dangers, but also different possibilities. She spent the night not in fear, but in analysis. She cataloged every asset she secretly controlled, every piece of information she had on her family's precarious finances, every weakness she had observed in their operations. She was not going into this as a lamb to the slaughter. She was going in as a strategist forced to play a new, more dangerous game. The next morning, she agreed. Her terms were simple. A legal document, signed by Robert, transferring a significant but ostensibly minor holding company entirely into her name. Sun-hee and Robert, desperate and seeing it as a small price to pay, agreed immediately. They didn't know it was the linchpin of their entire shadow empire, the one asset she had carefully ring-fenced from their reckless spending. The meeting was arranged. She was brought to a sleek, modern restaurant, the kind with more glass than walls. Min-jun was already there, sitting alone. He didn't rise when she approached. He simply watched her, his dark eyes taking in her simple, tailored dress, her stoic expression. Sun-hee and Robert hovered in the background like nervous handlers. "This is our other daughter, Naomi," Robert said, his voice trembling slightly. She is honored to fulfill our family's commitment. Minjun's gaze didn't waver from Naomi's face. Sit, he said. It was a command. She sat. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. He was assessing her, and she was assessing him right back. Life in Minjun's world was a stark contrast to the suffocating opulence of her father's home. His penthouse was a monument to minimalist precision, all clean lines, dark wood, and sweeping views of the city. It was beautiful, but it was also a fortress. Security was invisible, but omnipresent. Staff moved with quiet efficiency, their faces polite, unreadable masks. Naomi was given a suite of rooms that were larger than her old apartment, but she understood her position perfectly. She was a high-value asset, a piece of collateral being held in a very comfortable vault. She spent the first week in observation mode. She mapped the building's layout, noted the security patrol patterns, and analyzed the flow of information. She paid attention to the people who came and went, men in sharp suits who spoke in coded language about logistics, supply chains, and risk mitigation. This was not a gang of thugs. It was a corporation that operated in the shadows. Her family had been fools to think they could outsmart these people. She was given a tablet, a new phone, and unrestricted internet access. A test. She knew they were monitoring her every keystroke. So, she did what they expected. She researched wedding venues, caterers, and florists. But in between searches for peonies and champagne fountains, she delved into the complex web of shell corporations and offshore accounts that propped up Minjun's legitimate businesses. It was a masterfully constructed labyrinth, and navigating it was the most intellectually stimulating challenge she had ever faced. She began to see the patterns, the logic behind the empire. And as she dug deeper, she found the tendrils that led back to her own family. The debt was larger than she'd thought. The desperation more acute. Hannah's little stunt wasn't just a romantic rebellion. It was a clumsy, ill-conceived attempt to scuttle a deal she thought was disadvantageous, likely prompted by the secret lover who had filled her head with nonsense. They hadn't just tried to swap out the bride. They had been planning to default and disappear, using Hannah's drama as a smokescreen. The sheer stupidity of it was breathtaking. They had treated Minjun like a provincial loan shark, not the CEO of a lethal multinational enterprise. The confrontation came on a Tuesday night. Naomi was in the penthouse's library, tracing the flow of her father's laundered money through a Cayman Islands account when Minjun entered. He moved silently, a ghost in a bespoke suit. He didn't speak, simply stood across the large mahogany desk, watching her. The screen of her tablet displayed complex financial data that no bride-to-be should be interested in, let alone understand. She didn't close it. She didn't try to hide what she was doing. She simply met his gaze, her heart a slow, steady beat. The air crackled. This was the moment. The pretense was over. "You're not what they sold me," he said finally. His voice was low, devoid of inflection. It wasn't an accusation, it was a statement of fact. "They sold you a replacement part for a broken deal," Naomi replied, her own voice calm and even. They didn't mention the part came with its own processor, a flicker of something, not surprise, but perhaps confirmation, passed through his eyes. "My family is foolish," she continued, deciding to lay her cards on the table. "They are arrogant, short-sighted, and they made a fatal error in judgment. They underestimated you." "And you?" he asked, taking a step closer. The space between them shrank, filled with a dangerous energy. "I don't make that mistake," she said. "I know exactly who you are. The question is, do you know who I am?" He rounded the desk, stopping beside her chair. He was close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating from him. He leaned down, his face level with hers, and looked at the screen. His eyes scanned the data, the intricate web she had untangled. He recognized the account numbers. He recognized the patterns of fraud. "You're the one who has been managing their books," he stated. "The one who has been hiding their incompetence for years. I was their asset manager," she corrected softly. "Now, I'm managing my own," there it was. The offer. The shift in allegiance. She wasn't his prisoner. She wasn't his victim. She was presenting herself as a potential partner. A long, tense silence followed. He was weighing her, calculating her value versus her risk. "Your family's debt is considerable," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Their deceit has added a significant premium. Debts should be paid. Naomi said, looking up at him. And deceit should be punished. I can ensure you receive what you are owed with interest. And I can give you something they never could, loyalty. The kind that is based on mutual interest, not empty sentiment. He stared at her, his expression unreadable, but she saw it in the subtle shift of his posture, the slight relaxation of his jaw. He respected strength. He valued competence. And in that moment, he saw her not as the girl who had been forced into his life, but as a player who had just made a power move. The charity gala was the perfect stage. It was one of the city's premier social events, a glittering affair where the powerful came to trade influence under the guise of philanthropy. It was the heart of her family's world, the arena where they had built their fragile reputation. It would be the place where she and Minjun would tear it all down. Naomi took her time getting ready. She chose the purple dress with deliberate care. It was the color of royalty, of power. The silk whispered against her skin as she moved, a stark and elegant statement. When she descended to the main living area, Minjun was waiting. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, a figure of lethal elegance. His eyes swept over her a slow, appreciative appraisal that was entirely different from his earlier assessments. It held a warmth that made the air feel thin. Purple, he commented, his voice a low murmur. An interesting choice. It felt appropriate for the occasion, she replied, a small, knowing smile touching her lips for the first time. They arrived at the gala, and the effect was instantaneous. Heads turned. Whispers followed them like a wake. Minjun's presence alone was enough to cause a stir, but with the beautiful, unknown woman in the stunning purple dress on his arm, they were the undeniable center of gravity in the room. She spotted them across the ballroom. Her father, looking ill in his tuxedo. Sunhee, a strained smile plastered on her face. And Hannah. Hannah was in a vibrant red dress, a desperate attempt to command attention. She was holding court with a small group of sycophants, a smug, triumphant look on her face. She thought she had won. She thought she had escaped the brutish gangster and left her quiet little stepsister to take the fall. The fool. Naomi and Minjun moved through the crowd, a slow, deliberate path that brought them directly into her family's orbit. The moment Sunhee saw them, her smile faltered. Robert's face went ashen. Hannah's smugness curdled into confusion. Naomi, Sunhee said, recovering quickly, her voice dripping with false warmth. You look lovely. And Mr. Cho, what a pleasure. Minjun inclined his head slightly, a gesture of politeness that held no warmth whatsoever. I believe we have some business to discuss, he said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable edge of command that cut through the surrounding chatter. The four of them, plus Hannah's now nervous-looking secret lover, found a secluded alcove overlooking the gardens. The festive music from the ballroom felt a world away. Minjun stood with his back to the moonlight, a figure of pure shadow and menace. Naomi stood beside him, a silent partner. I don't understand, Hannah began, her voice petulant. What is this about? This is about a contract, Minjun said, his eyes fixed on Robert and Sunhee. A contract you entered into under false pretenses. Naomi produced a small, sleek data stick from her evening bag. She held it up. On this device, she said, her voice clear and cold, is a complete record of my father's business dealings for the past 5 years. It details the systematic embezzlement from his partners, the fraudulent loan applications, and the money laundering schemes he used to fund her lifestyle. It also details the more than $20 million you borrowed from Mr. Cho's organization, using a marriage alliance as collateral. Robert looked like he was going to collapse. Sunhee stared at Naomi, her expression a mixture of disbelief and pure hatred. You wouldn't, she hissed. You would destroy your own father? He ceased to be my father when he tried to sell me to cover his crimes, Naomi stated flatly. She turned her attention to Hannah. And your little dramatic exit wasn't about love. It was part of their pathetic plan to default on the debt and flee the country. You were all in on it, Hannah's face flushed. That's a lie. Is it?
Minjun interjected smoothly.
My people have been tracking your lover's accounts. The wire transfers from your father's offshore holdings, the plane tickets to a non-extradition country. The evidence is quite compelling. The trap had closed. There was no escape. Their social ruin was just the beginning. The data stick in Naomi's hand held their financial ruin, and Minjun's calm demeanor promised a ruin that was far more personal and permanent. He took the stick from Naomi's fingers. "The debt will be repaid," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Every cent. Your assets, your properties, your reputations, they all belong to me now. You will be left with nothing. Consider it a lesson in honoring your agreements." They left her family in the alcove, broken and silent. The power had shifted so completely, so irrevocably, that it had left a vacuum in its wake. As they walked back into the glittering ballroom, the air felt different. Lighter. Naomi felt a sense of release, so profound it was almost dizzying. The invisible chains she had worn her entire life had not just been broken, they had been melted down and reforged into a key. They didn't stay long. The drive back to the penthouse was silent, but it was a comfortable silence, freighted with the evening's victory. The city lights smeared past the windows, a river of gold and white. In the penthouse, the silence continued. Minjun loosened his tie as he walked to the vast floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Naomi stood a few feet away, watching his reflection in the glass. "They will never bother you again," he said, his back still to her. "I know," she replied. He turned to face her, his expression serious, the cold mask of the businessman replaced by something more personal, more raw. "What you did tonight required a certain kind of courage. It required calculation," she corrected gently. "I assessed the threat and neutralized it." "No," he said, stepping closer. The space between them hummed with a new kind of tension, one that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with proximity. It was more than that. You took the life they gave you, and you burned it to the ground to build something new. That is not calculation. That is power. He was standing in front of her now, so close she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. He reached out, his fingers gently tracing her jawline. His touch was unexpectedly warm. "I have never had a partner," he murmured, his voice low and intense. "Only employees and enemies, and what am I?" she whispered. Instead of answering, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss wasn't fiery or demanding. It was deliberate, a quiet confirmation of everything that had just passed between them. It was a seal on a new contract, one written not in ink, but in shared understanding and mutual respect. It was the taste of victory, of freedom, and the cautious, thrilling promise of a new beginning. Weeks later, the city was settling into a new equilibrium. The scandalous, overnight collapse of Robert's business empire was the talk of the financial world, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and exclusive clubs. The official story was one of catastrophic market miscalculations and bad investments. Only a select few knew the truth. Naomi sat across from Minjun in his home office, a sleek, minimalist space that had become her own strategic center. Spread across the large desk between them were blueprints and financial projections for a new logistics company. It was a legitimate enterprise, designed to be the clean, public face of his vast network. It was also her brainchild. She pointed to a flaw in the distribution model. "We're creating a bottleneck here," she said, her tone crisp and analytical. "If we reroute the southern corridor through the port expansion, we can cut shipping times by 12% and increase profit margins by at least 8%. Minjun studied the plans, then looked at her, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "You've been busy. I'm a good asset manager," she replied, the corner of her own mouth twitching upwards. Their relationship had evolved into a seamless partnership. He was the power, the muscle, the intimidating force that made the world bend to his will. She was the strategist, the analyst, the quiet intellect that saw the patterns no one else did. Together, they were formidable. The fear she once felt in his presence had been replaced by a deep, abiding respect and something more, a protective, possessive affection that was as surprising as it was welcome. He was no longer the cruel Mafia Fiancé from the rumors. He was Minjun, a complex, dangerous, and ruthlessly pragmatic man who saw her, truly saw her, for who she was. He valued her mind more than her beauty, her loyalty more than her obedience. He stood and walked around the desk, his movements fluid and silent. He came to a stop behind her chair, placing his hands on her shoulders. His touch was warm and grounding. "The board for the new company meets next week," he said, his voice a low rumble near her ear. "I've listed you as a majority shareholder and chief operating officer. Naomi felt a slow, spreading warmth in her chest. It wasn't about the title or the money. It was the trust. The absolute, unequivocal trust. She had gone from being a pawn to be sacrificed to the queen of the entire board. She tilted her head back, looking up at him. The cool, calculated woman who had dismantled her family's empire was still there, but now there was a softness in her eyes, a genuine contentment that had been absent before. She had found her place, not in a gilded cage, but in a shared throne. "I think," she said softly, "that I can work with that."